Okay, Mr. Chair, you are live.
We are live. Thank you very much. Welcome to everyone to the September 2020 meeting of the Maritime Advisory Board. I'm Terrence Lomax. I'm the chair. We have Rick Franke. We have Michael Tomasini. We have Debbie Goslin. We have Scott Allen. We have Peter Trogdon. We have Duncan Hood. We have Andrew Fagley and William Woodward and Frida Wildy as board members. We also have joining us Alderman Arnett. We have Hope Stewart from Planning and Zoning, Jacob Nold from the Harbor Master's Office, Jennifer Kay as a distinguished guest, and Tammy Hook, our reporter. So I think that is everybody, and we now have a record of everybody this year. So with that, I'll go back to what I started to say, and that is as a courtesy to our guest, and in particular our Alderman Arnett, we would dispense with any particular the order on the agenda and defer to Alderman Arnett first to see what, if anything, he would like to say first so he can get about other city business.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to express my great pleasure that last night the City Council passed on the consent calendar the Maritime Task Force. Next step for that will be a visit with the Rules and City Government, and I would like to encourage any of you who want to comment on the resolution to take advantage of that. And then I'm assuming this will go to a final vote the first meeting in October, and then we'll start to populate the task force. In very brief, the task force has three major jobs. The first is to review and comment on the maritime zoning. Second is to look at the general health of the maritime industry in Annapolis and its environs. And the third is to look at access to and safety on the water, each of which are big bites and important in their own right. But long overdue is the look at the maritime code to see whether it's doing for us what it was intended to do, which personally I believe it by and large is, but could take some tweets. The other thing that happened last night, before I continue on with the task force, is per the recommendation of the Maritime Advisory Board and also the request from the Eastport Civic Association, the legislation that I had put forth, Ordinance 15-20, which dealt with some changes to the WMM zone, was withdrawn. And it was withdrawn with the hope that some of the major principles of that, which I still subscribe to, will be taken up by the task force in its first look. You know, the task force, depending upon their druthers, may divide into three separate groups, but I've asked that the priority be looking at the maritime zone. I'll return quickly to 01520 to tell you that there have been intensive meetings between the city and the representatives of the Annapolis City Marina, and also intensive meetings within the city. The last meeting was last Friday. There seem to be several Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock meetings, which kind of gets your weekend off to a bad start. But the basic position of the city at this point is that the task force will do its findings and make recommendations on changes to the zoning code as it may be. That will follow the process of going into legislation, going to review by the Planning Commission and the Maritime Advisory Board, coming back to the council, City Council Rules Committee, and I suspect there will be lots of lively debate on that. The city attorney maintained their position that my ordinance 01520 would not resolve the issues for the Annapolis City Marina, which I am convinced are real issues. I don't know how immediately urgent, but I think they're fairly real and fairly urgent. And that for relief, they will need to follow the same process that they followed in order to become a business plan development. And that is spelled out in Title 2124 120, which prescribes how plan developments can uh, get an amendment to their plan development. And that process is described as following the same process by which they came to it originally, which means a resolution would have to be drafted to give them some kind of relief. That would go to the planning staff, who would then make a recommendation to the planning commission, who would then hold a public hearing, and then they would make their recommendations to the council on the resolution. At issue is the city attorney's opinion that they are locked into hard and fast 27,000 square feet of non-maritime professional office space. And there is no wiggle room on that unless they use the process to amend their plan. I have so advised the attorneys for Annapolis City Marina that they might want to be considering a parallel course where they have to pursue their legislative relief while the task force is pursuing its duties. And hopefully, we'll come up with some good solutions on both fronts and we can address their issues. I would conclude by saying I still firmly believe in the principles that underlie my legislation 1520. I like having triggers that lock in what I believe to be are the principal maritime aspects of the city, things like slips and fueling docks and pump outs and ice provisions and other provisions, land storage, etc. Those will be left to the task force to define. On the task force, I would direct your attention to the resolution. And Terry, you and I have had lots of discussion about this. The way the
And by the way, I have circulated a copy of the resolution as it was introduced last night to everybody. So the entire board has a copy of that resolution.
Excellent. So I would direct your attention to page 3, where the composition of the task force is enumerated, which is not exactly what I had in mind. It's not bad, but I had in mind 4 people from owners, 4 people from business. This seems to make a distinction between business owners and tenants. I would look to the Maritime Advisory Board to advise on if that distinction exists, and if so, how do we deal with it? But a member from the owners, a member from business, a member from the community for each of the 4 maritime zones, a member from the Maritime Advisory Board, and then they have this thing, um, one representative from a maritime organization. And that is not defined, but it has come into play. There is a maritime organization made up of principally owners, but a couple of businesses, and represented by Phil Dale. Phil Dale is another person I've had a lot of conversation with. Um, and I think when this gets to the rules committee, but possibly even when it gets to the public hearing, we're going to need a better definition of that and just who qualifies and who would be that one representative. Mr. Dales is arguing that he might be that representative. I'm agnostic on that, but I do think it needs definition. And I do think you all are a body that can help me and the council think about that and help get the task force off on a very robust start. The task force will be selected, but, excuse me, by the mayor, but with input from the 4 waterside alderpersons who coincidentally have ownership of the 4 different maritime zones. So that's my brief summary. I am excited. I think this is long overdue. I thank the Maritime Advisory Board for their diligence on staying on top of this and urging that we do this task force study. And I hope we come up with some pretty good things. I'm not sure there's a lot of fatal flaws with the existing maritime code, but I do think there is some unevenness there. And we're looking to get all of that addressed and hopefully resolved. So that's my report.
Thank you, Ross. What I did also, in addition to sending the copy of the resolution to everyone, I did highlight page 3 and the composition. And I've asked the members of this board to provide me with recommendations off individually to me so that everybody's not getting circulated as to everybody's recommendations, which I will then have hopefully by the time October rolls around and we have are looking for a composition. When is the Rules Committee taking this up?
The Rules Committee will meet the first week of October before the first council meeting. So this could move very quickly from rules to a second reader vote. It is a resolution. This is another thing you might want to opine on. A resolution does not require a public hearing, but certainly this could have a public hearing, and I would be more than happy if it's your collective wisdom that it go to a public hearing. If it went to a public hearing, it would be the second meeting in September, which is, I believe, September 28th. So that would have to be get on the agenda. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I'm always in favor of public hearings, although with the pandemic, they've been fairly anemic. But we can request a public hearing for it. Then it would go to the Rules Committee. I think it's the first Tuesday in October, if I'm correct. I can verify that for you. And then potentially go on to the City Council for a final vote. This does not, the task force itself does not require a review by the Planning Commission.
Um, I, I, I don't particularly see any downside, and I do see an upside to allowing it to be put on the agenda for a hearing on the 27th. It does not sound like it slows anything down.
It doesn't.
But I guess the simple thing is I'm going to go around my screen. Mr. Frankie, you have any thoughts one way or the other on whether or not we just go ahead and ask the alderman to put it on for a public hearing, and we'll get some initial input anyway. Might as well get that going.
Well, I agree with Alderman Arnett. I always like public hearings. I'm not sure that it would be required on this one.
All right, Mr. Thomasini. You're on mute. Now you're not.
I don't see the harm in a public hearing. I think that's a good idea.
Ms. Goslin?
I think it's a good idea to have a public hearing too. It's important stuff.
Mr. Allen?
Yes, I agree. And I had one question on there on, I forget which paragraph was in, but it has the participants. It says a business owner or 4 business owners, and then it has 4 business tenants. What's the difference between a business owner and a business tenant?
Mr. Fegley could tell you that exactly.
Okay, but I'll just say, Scott, I asked you first. That wasn't my language. That came from planning. I didn't have it initially in there. I had a business owner, a tenant, a property owner, a tenant, and a resident. But if there is a distinction between the two, and I would certainly accept wisdom from Andy, we can leave it as it is, and then we'll just have a bigger committee.
So either way, it seems it could be redundant because normally tenants own their businesses.
In a large part, you're correct, but I was actually inserted that original language that got expanded, I think, by planning and zoning because, as Andy Fegley pointed out, there is not necessarily an alignment between a a property owner and a business tenant on some of the properties. And I think it's important that the tenants who ultimately pay the rents on those properties that are not owner occupied have a place at the table and a voice in this discussion. So
Well, absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
so
It just,
that's why that's in there.
some business owners are tenants and some business owners are property owners. So,
Right.
Right, and
Some are
so-
both.
As it was originally submitted, there wasn't a business owner. There was a property owner, a tenant, and a resident. And I'm still comfortable with that, but that's one of the things that the Rules Committee will sort out, and because I'm going to make sure we do that. But it is something, if there's some wisdom that the MAB can offer us, we'd certainly want to get that.
well, I'm pro business, so I'm fine having both, but more the better.
Oh,
Mr.
then you'd
Mr.
have
Trogdon.
three.
Mr.
Yeah, I'm
Trogdon, back
for-
on the-
I'm for a public hearing. That'd be good.
All right, Mr. Hood.
From my point of view, as long as it doesn't hold us up, we've worked a long time to get to this point. And if we can get through the public hearing smoothly, I'm all for it too.
Mr. Fagley.
I am still working on the definition of an owner and a occupant and such, but I could go either way. I don't have an opinion.
Mr. Woodward. You're on mute. You're
Yeah, I'm leaning toward Andy's point of view, but if you have it, you have to keep social distancing in mind and hope you don't have a flood of people, and you can't do that. So that.
and I assume it's a virtual public hearing.
It would be a virtual public hearing.
Okay.
Oh, well, then I'm all for it then.
No kissing.
I'm very much in favor of the public hearing. And then I have a question for Ross.
Okay.
For this maritime group that is part of the resolution to have a representative, who's the attorney for Annapolis City Marina? In their
Well, there's several, but the lead attorney is Jim Nolan. Joe Devlin and Sue Lyons are also representing, and then they have John Ayerson as a contract consultant.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So Ross, I think our consensus is let's just put it on for a public hearing, and whatever input we get on September 27th. If you'll just let me know the date, time, and link or something for so I can let the board know for the Rules Committee. We'll give some thought to composition. I've already asked the board to look at that in terms of some specifics, but we'll also think about some of this, which you've raised as a definition of the trade, the association or whatever Mr. Dales is whatever that organization is. We'll discuss that at Rules Committee, I guess.
Okay, so the public hearing will be on September 28th, which is Monday. Let me make sure that's no holiday. No, all right. So it'll be, because the 28th apparently is a holiday, the public hearing will be at the city council meeting of September 29th, which is a Tuesday. The Rules Committee, I'm going to have to work with Alderwoman Finlayson. Right now, the Rules Committee is scheduled for October 13th, the day after the first and only legislative meeting in October. So we will probably have to have a specially scheduled Rules Committee that would allow us to take this up at the first regular meeting of the council, which is October 12th. Only at the first meeting of the month do we take up legislative matters. So unless this were to go onto the consent calendar, which is not my favorite thing for important legislation, we'll have to try to get a special date for the Rules Committee, and I'll talk to Alderwoman Finlayson about that. My mind's eye is that it be somewhere in that first week of October, prior to the second Monday meeting of October. But
Okay.
I'll get back to you on that.
All right, I appreciate that. Anyone else have anything for Alderman Arnett? Alderman Arnett have anything else for the good of the order of our committee?
No, I just I'm glad we're finally here. It's been a long slog, and I hope we make the best of it in terms of getting a good output, several outputs from the task force. And
35 years, every 35 years, it's twice
yeah,
the,
right.
it's
Whether
twice,
we need it or not.
it's twice the cycle of locusts.
Right. All right, that's it.
All right, well, thank you.
Sure.
So let's return to the order of business for the moment. We have minutes that go back to, what is it, from July? I don't know why the agenda said May, other than my overlooking that. But are there any changes to the minutes from July 21st?
I get one.
And that would be?
Ross Arnett's name was misspelled. Under I think section I don't have it in front of me, but I made a note about it.
I, legislative review, Arnett, Arnett. Somebody must have fixed that.
Oh, I thought it was other.
I'm looking at I. Tammy will check, but I think that's the only place that it shows up. And so that appears to be already corrected. Anybody else? Is there a motion to approve the minutes of July 2020?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Tammy, make a note that the minutes were approved. Mr. Frankie, has the county been up to any mischievous acts?
Oh, probably. But the group has not met because they've been on their summer break. They'll be meeting again on the 28th. The only thing that I know that is proceeding is that we have received the first draft of the SAGE Group economic report. Been asked not to circulate it because the board hasn't even had a chance to meet and discuss it. So I'm sure we'll get a little bit more information about that next month.
All right, thank you. Who's here? Hope, are you here for?
Yes, I am
economic?
here. Good evening,
Okay.
everyone. Yeah, the big news out of the Economic Development Office, we have a brand new Comeback Annapolis Small Business Recovery Center. We created it in conjunction with our GIS office, and it's an interactive map where businesses can list their businesses and services to make it easier for our residents and visitors to shop local. So I am going to put that in the comments or the chat right now so everybody can find it. But for anybody who's watching, the address is comeback.annapolis.gov. So we encourage all businesses to go ahead and list their businesses. So we look forward to seeing you.
Good for you, Hope.
Thank you.
That's great. And I am encouraged, I'm going to ask a question following this, but I am encouraged. I haven't been as much attuned to the retail, but I have been encouraged by the restaurant side of the economy in Annapolis, and the city's working with them to create a variety of innovative ways to get people out. And interestingly enough, people seem to be going out. So that is good. I wonder if you have any thoughts on what we're going to do now that today happened to turn to be the precursor of fall, of what we're going to do come fall, and more importantly, come winter, in terms of the outdoor dining versus as an adjunct to the indoor.
Okay, well, we are looking into our options right now. We're balancing a few factors that we have to consider, but we're definitely looking into how we can continue outdoor dining, shopping, and other services throughout the fall too, depending on what restrictions will be in place come, October, November, December, and onwards. So we're going to do whatever we can in the city to support our local businesses and get them through this recovery.
All right, thank you. We look forward to seeing that, because certainly, although we tend to be focused on the Maritime, one of the major attractions or big attractions of Annapolis is some of its retail and its restaurant have what they have to offer to visiting yachtsmen, and both from by land and by sea. So anything we can do to keep that momentum going would be good.
Yeah, and any suggestions, we're always open for ideas as well. So feel free to reach out anytime.
Just when are you all going to get out the vaccine?
Oh, I wish that was in our power, because you know what? We've been really great and efficient at everything. So we'd have that out tomorrow if it was in the Economic Development Office's hands.
Are you publicly traded that I could invest in that? All right. Mr. Hood, anything update on the comprehensive plan?
Not a peep. Been like crickets out here.
Okay. That's because the locusts are driving the noise level.
I think you're right.
There's been nothing particular on the City Dock Action Committee. I think the last I heard, maybe hope you can enlighten me or Alderman Arnett can. I think the first step is proceeding, and that is to do with the demolition and renovation or reconstruction of the Hillman Garage, from which everything else will then flow thereafter. So I don't expect anything of any major consequence development-wise down on City Dock until we get that up and running and parking, be able to shift parking, etc. So unless there's something different, I don't think there's any real update on that.
Correct.
Mr. Tomasini, anything on the Severn River, or Frida, either one of you, anything on the Severn River restriction notice?
I haven't heard anything either way.
And I'm assuming that the State Boat Act Committee, I think that's what they're called, everything, if they're doing anything, they're doing it virtually. You're muted. Okay.
I'm gonna look it up right now and see if they've had a.
All right. Well, while you do that, I have heard. We'll go to the next item, which is the no discharge zone application. I have not heard anything further on that. Debbie, I don't know whether you have or not, but I have not.
I haven't heard anything since the last time we all got together.
Right. I think it is still with the state. I think was the last place it was, somewhere with the state.
Yeah,
So.
I'm not sure.
Alderman Arnett has already covered 01520 and the update with that and the Maritime Task Force, so we can jump over that. And Mr. Tomasini will update us when we get to this. Let's go to the new business. And let's segue to that by way of I'm going to ask Ms. Goslin on the recovery plan that was put in for City Dock initially. What is the current status of that plan? I know that it had an expiration date or a right to expire, and I'm just curious what that is.
The last I heard from David Gerald, I don't think has been changed, and that was weeks ago, which is that for the month of September, the charge for the charter dock is half price, and that in October it will go back to full price.
Okay. And that being the major change that was in I thought also the recovery plan allowed the ability to reserve more time at City Dock by individual charters.
No, the only change was that the charge was originally non-existent. They came up with a special form, and And it was the same policies and procedures, or was supposed to be, that the charter doc had used before. So you get 45 minutes for pickup and then 45 minutes for drop off with your charter time in between.
But didn't I read something about there was a 3-hour?
Oh, yeah, there was a 3-hour limit and you could chop it up any way you wanted to, but you couldn't stay there for 3 hours total, I don't think. You could just.
But I thought I read that was twice what was otherwise allowed daily, but maybe I'm mistaken on what I read.
There has not been any restriction on the number of times that you used it, as long as you paid for it each time.
Okay.
So that was the limitation. This time it was free. So I think you're right. They came up with a limit so that somebody couldn't just book it for the whole day.
Right.
Every day.
Yeah, I can confirm everything Debbie just said is correct.
Which is, it was 3 hours. It used to be an hour and a half and now it's 3 hours.
No, so there was never really a time limit for the additional time. Each charter includes a 45-minute pickup and discharge, 2 different 45-minute pickup and discharges, but you could also pay for additional hours on the dock. As Debbie stated, it was previously free dockage during the COVID time period up until September. And during that time, they limited the extra time you could be on the dock. That way, someone couldn't just sit on the dock the entire day.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So, and then as I understand it, then Jacob, as of October 1, it goes back to the full fee schedule.
Correct, as far as I know.
Okay. All right. That then leads us to what is and I'm looking to see there is a provision in the code regarding city dock and the charter portion of city dock that refers to a city dock policy.
Charter dock policy.
Charter dock policy. And I guess, Jacob, I'll start with you and say, I will preface this with saying, I don't operate a charter boat, so I never was really focused on the fact that the code actually had a requirement or had a reference to a city dock policy. But I guess the first question is there a city dock policy document out there somewhere?
It's a charter dock policy.
A charter dock. I keep saying city dock, charter dock policy.
Yes, I believe so. The majority of all the docks actually in Ego Alley are all grant encumbered, so there's no commercial activity allowed. So only on that front face is where the charter commercial activity is allowed. So I do believe there is a specific write-up for that.
Can you provide us with a copy of that? Because I have to admit, I've never seen it, and it's probably something we ought to at least have a copy of.
Yeah, I'll take note of that, and I'll see what I can get, and we'll get it sent out to you guys.
All right.
Ashley is here. I wonder if Ashley has any knowledge of an existing document.
I'm here. So there was never anything. I've been researching back through city legislation and old records. I don't think there was anything ever formally adopted at the council level. However, going back through the harbor master records, there have been a number of what I would call policy statements, which usually took the form of a charter dock application with terms and conditions attached. And that's always what has worked as the policy, the charter dock policy. That's been updated. We actually have been working on updates since about May or June. And we're going to try, and this time we're going to try to more formally adopt them in some manner. But I would say there's always been a policy, but it has been a harbor master created application with terms and conditions versus some form of more formal policy like people may expect. But the applications has always included set rules, regulations, policies, fees, it was always just attached as part of the application, as far as I can tell.
So actually, I was able, while we were talking, I was able to pull up, and specifically what I was looking at was 15.10.050,
Mm-hmm.
which is the commercial activity at dock or moorings. And it talks about the fact that no person shall conduct a commercial activity at any city dock or mooring except as authorized by the, and then it's capitalized charter, capitalized dock, capital P policy, or a lease executed by city council. So it sounds like somewhere back in history, and actually that was ordinance 03102. So I guess I'm assuming it was adopted in 02.
Yes.
That somewhere there was contemplated some formal policy of some sort, and perhaps we ought to think about whether or not that ought to be visited or revisited in the context of the charter doc applications, because as demand, I guess I guess I'll ask you, what is there a, besides the application process, is there merit in doing a more formal policy then by which the application follows that policy?
I don't think so. I don't have a template. I don't think the current one is up there. I'm not sure, but I could probably send the board what we're working on now.
That would
And
be good.
it's a one or two page application, but then attached to it are several pages of what everyone would consider a policy. It actually goes through how you can use the charter dock and what sort of activity is allowed there. And we have the same thing for moorings and for Truxton Park. And so my goal with the harbor master, actually started this about a year ago, is that we were going to update all these informal policies and we were going to formalize them, the applications as well as the policies that went with the applications.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I'm happy to send those to you guys. I think when that ordinance was adopted, I'm not sure what was contemplated. And because I'm not sure anything per se was specifically spelled out, people sort of interpreted it in their own manner as to what sort of policy would be created. But I do think at this stage and at this use of the harbor, both the harbor master and I agree that these need to become more formal documents. And we have been working on this for a long while.
To go back, because I know when because I was tangentially involved back, and that's been almost 20 years now. But I do believe that there was some question had come up way back in 02 about how are we going to manage charters coming and going, et cetera. But maybe Ms. Kay, who's here and who harkens back to that era, as is Ms. Goslin, maybe one of them can enlighten us more as to some history, because I don't have a clear recollection. So I'll start with Debbie, if you've got any thoughts on that.
Thank you, Terry. The charter dock became the charter dock, as it's still called, back in the late 90s. And it was primarily the result of a lobbying effort by Nancy Galloway and Lynn Forsman, who had a company called Nautical Destinations. And they had private charters on, they didn't own any boats, but they brokered lots of different boats, including ours. And the problem that they came up against was that there was no place to pick up and drop off for private events in the city of Annapolis, unless you could try to go to a marina, but there were challenges with that. And so they actually went to the state and talked to the state about the issue. There was a boat, I don't want to get into too much detail, but now I can't remember the name of it, but this big old ugly steel boat that would come down from Baltimore a couple times a week, and it would sit where the charter dock is now. It was large enough that its gangway could cross over to Susan Campbell Park. The smaller boats that Nautical Destinations was using couldn't access it because the gap between the Dolphins and Susan Campbell Park was too grand, and it couldn't cross it. So they wanted to modify the dock so that it was accessible to the charter boats. And the state actually put up $5,000 towards that effort. Nancy said they came up with the money very quickly and then presented the idea to the city, and the city responded. And the city has made money off of it ever since then. So the charter dock use, as for private charters, which is what charter means in our industry, goes back to the late 1990s. Nancy thinks it was actually 96. And she remembered Dean Johnson and Carl Snowden and John Patmore being part of the city representatives that helped move this forward. So I'll pass it over to Jen.
Yeah, so very similar recollection that Debbie said. I think that the Charter Industry Association, back then it was ACVOA, is that they actually raised money as well. And as well as the state and the city to make those modifications to the dock. And I think that, Ashley, you're right, that it had been just written up as as all the terms and conditions, but never a policy. And my mom actually reached out to Rick Dahlgren and said, and he replied, and I forwarded that on to Terry, what his info was. And I think everybody's remembering this kind of correctly. But the biggest concern was, what is the city liable for if somebody gets injured? And, you know, how do we bring the right businesses to that dock and not the wrong businesses?
All right. So Ashley, is there a time frame on your effort with the harbor master on formalizing these policies / rules and conditions?
They're basically done. I'm waiting for a final sign off from the harbor master at this point. And then how it's set up in the city code is that to formalize them, you post them on the city website for 2 weeks for any public comments. And then after that, they're considered finalized and you post them permanently. I mean, you can respond to any public feedback and make alterations as needed.
So does it make sense, or I would request that before you post them for the 2-week public comment, that maybe you circulate a copy to the board so that we can have I'll call it a semi-public comment, at least a board comment before that. So if we see anything that jumps out, that we can have an input before it gets to the formal public comment.
Yeah, sure. I'll talk to the harbor master tomorrow. I don't see any problem with sending them out either this week or next at the latest, so that we can get your input and I can get her final sign off, you know, sort of around the same period.
That would be helpful, because I think we have between either, for example, Debbie, who's next door to the charter dock, and Jen, who uses, who is kind of vested, I won't say vested, it has an interest in the use of the charter dock, and some of the other members of the board. It would be helpful to have sort of the user input of sorts before we get to the overall public input, which may be different than the user input.
That is fine. I will take a look at it to make sure I have it in final form. I'm going to mark it draft.
Right.
And
yes,
confidential at this point, because it's draft working materials, we'd like to keep it sort of internally for the moment. But I'm happy to share it with you guys.
All right.
Can I ask a question, Terry?
Who was that?
Andy.
Andy, and then Ross.
Oh, just the clarification that a charter boat is commercial, yet a head boat would be considered commercial, but a charter boat is not commercial. And the moratorium on using moorings or anything in Ego Alley doesn't necessarily pertain to charter boats.
I'm not sure about the question. I think there are commercial, what I would refer to as commercial charter boats, whether it's a head boat charter or whether it is a a full-on crude charter for an event. And then there are, and I hesitate to refer to them as charters exactly, but then there's the Wilma Lee type situation, which is a not-for-profit operation that is taking out on a head boat basis, but is not necessarily a commercial operation and not a commercial business because they're a not-for-profit. So I'm not sure how all of that plays into the mix. It's not easy.
Well, they're not for profit, but they are charging for tickets. And that in my mind is the difference is private charter where it is booked off property. And this is what Rick Dahlgren confirmed in his recollections also, versus coming to the dock and selling tickets at the dock with signage, et cetera. And that was the distinction that the, 20-some year precedent has been that it's for private events that are booked somewhere else, as opposed to something like what we do in the Harbor Queen, which requires a lease because that's doing
Right,
business.
and that's covered by a lease executed by City Council. And
Right.
there is a sign in that same 1510-050, there is a signage requirement that limits signage to, I'm reading it now, 16 by 24 inches. And the name of the vessel is not considered an advertisement or a sign. So you can have a bigger sign, you can have a bigger name of your boat on the transom, but you're limited to the signage too. So we'll get this. Actually, Alderman Arnett had an input on this too.
Yeah, and this gets to be a little bit of a sticky wicket, but it turns out the city attorney and I were talking about this afternoon, and Joelle Braithwaite and I have been talking about this with regard to adequate public facilities. But Ashley, if you're referring to the 2-week notice that's in Title 204090, that's a problem for me because that section of the code says that anything that is a regulation or a rule having the effect of law cannot be done as after June 1st, 2006 without the express direction in the code by the city council. And so there's all kinds of regulations and rules that seem to be being promulgated. This was the whole basis of the appeals of the Eastport Shopping Center and the subsequent changes or findings, mitigation for the adequate public facility. But I don't have a problem with rules and regulations, but the code clearly says they can't be issued by departments without express permission of the council. And so Mr. Lyles and I are trying to figure out what we need to do to amend this 2004-090. So I would just send a cautionary note that all of these things are going to be going under general review by the council. One of the problems with the appeal on the shopping center was there were in fact rules and regulations that were available, only no one knew about them. Actually, the attorney for the shopping center found them, but we don't have a very orderly process at this point for issuing rules and regulations that have the force of law. And so because this is a subject of an appeal, but also a subject of councilmatic powers, this is something that is being discussed by me and the city attorney, but will be coming to the city rules committee. So I would be, I'm just going to let you know there might be some further adventures in regard to all of these issuing of rules and regulations.
Okay, yeah, that's not a problem. Whatever, I'll talk with City Attorney Lyles, and if this process changes, we will comply with the change. We do want to formalize them, and whatever turns out being the process, well, that's what we'll go with.
And in the meantime, Ashley, if you would circulate it so that at least we get a heads up on what's going on, whether they go under the 2-week or whether they go on the 2-month council method, either one. But at least we'll have a heads up and have some input.
Of course.
All right. That concludes the agenda, I believe. It does, having looked at it. I'll start with Mr. Frankie. Anything else you want to bring up, Mr. Frankie?
No, I don't, but I think Mike's trying to get your attention.
He's the next one over on my screen.
Okay.
Michael, you got to unmute.
Right, just real quickly. So I went to the website for the Maryland Boat Act Advisory Committee. They haven't posted any minutes from any meetings since February. At that meeting, they did, there was a discussion about the Naval Academy's request for 6 miles an hour, and somebody asked in the meeting to clarify with the Naval Academy when the last time they put in such a request was, and could they please include a list of the current regulations for the Severn River so that that could be included in the discussion. But I don't know that if any of that has happened because they haven't posted anything since.
All right.
And then on the second thing we had on the agenda, the last item under new business was to talk about the dockage of the South Annapolis Yacht Center. And I just—
Oh, you know what? Thank you. I'm looking at the draft and you're absolutely right. That was on there. Thank you for bringing that up. So enlighten us on that issue.
Yeah. So the remembrance I had, I was coming over the drawbridge and I saw a few large yachts docked up on the creek side of the T head at South Annapolis Yacht Center. And I had remembered that we had a meeting at the rec center or someplace similar about that usage of that dock. It was my understanding from that meeting that South Annapolis Yacht Center had requested to be able to put that T head at the outermost harbor line, basically replacing the pilings that were furthest out into the creek with the T head. And then that T head would then be unusable as dockage because any boat tied to it would then go over the harbor line. Does anybody else have that recollection?
I don't have that recollection. I do know, and I think you and I talked, and I'm looking from at one thing, but I think we did talk about, you and I discussed the fact that, and actually you might know off the top of your head, or more importantly, Mr. Knoll might know, I believe that that normally the outer face of any dock has to be 5 feet, or is it 6 feet? I can't remember which, inboard from the harbor line and the lateral line, but you then are permitted to dock on that face. And I don't remember that there's necessarily a restriction on the width of the boat that docks on that face, which does create a bit of certainly confusion, if not an inconsistency. But maybe the harbor master can enlighten us as to what happened, what it is generally and what it is at South Annapolis Yacht Center.
I unfortunately myself do not know that. We did receive a couple calls regarding this question, and I spoke with the harbor master, and from what she remembered, she stated that she did not think that they were restricted.
Right.
From completely putting any boats on there.
As long as that T head itself was inside the harbor line by whatever the required distance is.
Correct. Yes.
I don't think anybody else have any other recollection.
The only comment I would make if I came on was that the old piling from the end of their corner was left in place till after their new docks were all set, and that their new docks were set inside of that last piling. They pulled that last piling after the new docks were set in place, was what, from my trips back and forth, I've been watching that just because a number of people have contacted me or been concerned towards me about whether they were encroaching on the harbor line. And I said, you can tell that they have not, at least physically with their dock placement, because of that outboardmost piling.
I guess since the harbor master, Mr. Thomasini, the harbor master's apparently been brought aware of it, and apparently it's been brought to the city's attention, and we're not. I guess we've raised it also. Is about what I could say.
Yeah,
Sounds good to
she
me.
wasn't sure about the specifics. She said that planning and zoning would have the exact harbor lines and everything for them.
Okay.
Very good.
All right, Ms. Goslin, anything else?
Nope, thank you.
Mr. Allen?
Just a question that somebody might know, is the New Seven River Bridge within the city limits, or is that county?
I think it's
Naval Academy.
I think it's federal.
Yeah.
Um,
You're talking about the
it goes
Naval
over the river. I
Academy.
just wondered if it's in the city purview on the waterway, or is that
You're talking about the Naval Academy Bridge?
the Route 50 bridge?
Oh, the route. That's state.
Yeah.
That's state highway.
Yeah,
Yeah, Route 50 is way up.
because they've built a scaffolding below it that has gone below the advertised public limit. And I have personally have a customer that has his boat is almost landlocked up river, can't get out.
That would be state highway, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was just trying to find out who we should talk to.
Probably state highway.
Yeah.
Mr. Trogdon.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question for everyone, and maybe this should be put on the agenda for October. But as you know, the city canceled the fall boat shows, and I think that's having an impact on many maritime companies and probably the hospitality industry. And everyone, it kind of touches everyone's lives, and I would love to hear more from everyone about that issue when appropriate. It might be, like I said, next time around, but I think it's something we should be aware of, and wondering if there's anything the maritime industry has, or the Maritime Board has to say about that, or anything we can do. But I'm interested to hear about that.
Let me put that on the agenda. I know it probably dovetails a little bit with what Hope has been doing in terms of just businesses generally in the city, because everybody's being impacted, not just by the cancellation of the boat shows, but by cancellation of football games, restructuring Naval Academy football games with nobody in the stands, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we're all seeing that in one way or another. But I will add that to next month's agenda.
There's a number of local small businesses that historically had their largest month of the year was October. It's kind of a standard throughout all the little marine businesses that October, because of the boat shows, was their big month. And not only for order taking, delivery, and then it built their business for the next year with orders and that sort of thing. So, I'm just concerned about the maritime industry. We're talking about the zoning, maritime zoning, and the health of the industry. We're talking about the task force, part number 2, the health of the maritime industry. I think the city decided to negatively impact the maritime industry. And I think it's unfortunate, but I'd love to hear from everybody on that next month.
All right, Mr. Fagley.
Oh, just saw the article in the paper about the rescue at the city dock, and didn't know whether the new ladders that were proposed and installed had anything to play, and thought congratulations were in order. And anyways, the harbor master's office.
The flip side of that ladder is now people think it's okay to swim off City Dock because there's this new ladder there.
Yeah, the mother of that boy that you saw me yell at or last time said, "Oh, they put that ladder in for my son."
Frida, anything you have to add?
I'll try to get an update on the speed zone change before the next meeting. We haven't discussed it at our weekly virtual staff meetings for months, so I'll see if I can get an update. from
All
our
right.
lieutenant that's working that. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Hood.
I got a plate of barbecue tandoori chicken waiting. I have no other issues.
Mr. Woodward.
No further questions.
All right. Ms. Stewart.
Oh, I have nothing more to add. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Nold.
Nothing more. Thank you guys for having me.
All right. Jennifer, anything else from you other than thank you for joining us?
This was fun. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Fun is
Fun.
You haven't been on the board long enough.
I haven't been on the board.
I know. You haven't even participated. You haven't been here long enough. All right. Well, I thank you, everybody. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Here.
Mr. Fagley, second.
Second.
Mr. Hood. I'm sorry, Ms. Goslin got up there first.
Good for her.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Tammy, thank you very much. You don't have to answer, but I just want to acknowledge you. Thank you. Everybody have a good rest of September and see you in October, so to speak.
Sounds like a plan. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.